LiSTNR production.
The death of Diane Elizabeth Brimble aboard the P&O cruise ship Pacific Sky in 2002 remains one of Australia's most notorious and tragic criminal cases. Diane, a 42-year-old mother of three from Brisbane, died less than 24 hours into what was meant to be a dream holiday with her family. Her death, caused by a lethal combination of alcohol and the drug gamma-hydroxybutyrate, or GHB, exposed a dark underbelly of cruise ship culture, sparked a lengthy investigation, and led to widespread media coverage and public outrage. Diane's case involved a group of men dubbed the Adelaide Eight. The ringleader escaped with nothing but a slap on the wrist. I'm Dan Mullins. This is Crime Insiders Judgment, a deep dive on a judge's final verdict of a crime and what transpired to incite that judgment. Diane Elizabeth Brimble was born on April 10, 1960 in Queensland, a divorced mother of three, two teenage sons from her first marriage and a daughter, Talia, with her long-term partner, David Mitchell. She worked as a hospital catering manager and was known as a caring, moral and somewhat reserved woman. Friends and family described her as prudish about sex and disapproving of drug use, though medical evidence later revealed she had sought a morning-after pill and an HIV test after an earlier indiscretion, suggesting a more complex personal life than initially portrayed. Diane had scrimped and saved for nearly 2 years to afford the $4,400 fare for a 10-day South Pacific cruise aboard the Pacific Sky, departing from Sydney on September 23, 2002. She planned to share the experience with her 12-year-old daughter Talia, her sister Alma Wood, and her niece Carrie Ann, all of whom would share a cabin. For Diane, the trip represented a rare opportunity to unwind and create lasting memories with her loved ones after years of hard work and family responsibilities. The Pacific Sky set sail from Sydney at around 5 p.m. on the 23rd of September 2002, bound for Noumea, New Caledonia and Vanuatu. The ship, operated by P&O Cruises, was marketed as a fun ship known for its lively atmosphere and party culture. Diane and her family joined other passengers for what was called a sail-away party up on deck, enjoying cocktails and the sunset. After dinner, Alma, Carrie Ann and Talia retired to their cabin for an early night, while Diane kissed Talia goodnight and opted to stay out, heading to the ship's Starlight Disco to mingle with fellow passengers. At the disco, Diane encountered a group of 8 men from Adelaide, later infamously known as the Adelaide Eight. This group included Mark Wilhelm, Letterio or Leo Silvestri, Ryan Kuchel, Dragan Losic, and 4 others, Peter Pantic, Charlie Camburas, Konstantin or Dean Koulos, and Luigi Vitali. Several of these men had ties to the nightlife industry, gym culture, and, in some cases, drug use or gang activity, though not all were equally involved in the events that followed. Diane reportedly danced and drank with some of the men, including Mark Wilhelm, a 37-year-old personal trainer. What happens next remains contested. According to Wilhelm's later statements, he and Diane engaged in consensual sexual activity in the nightclub's restroom before she asked to return to his cabin, D182. He was sharing that cabin with Silvestri, Kuchel and Losic. She did so to avoid waking her family. Wilhelm claimed that during the night, several members of the group, including himself and Diane, consumed GHB, a sedative known as fantasy or liquid ecstasy, which he had brought aboard. GHB, often used recreationally for euphoria, is also a notorious date rape drug due to its ability to incapacitate users, especially when mixed with alcohol. By the early hours of September 24, Diane was in cabin D-182. At around 6:30 a.m., she collapsed on the floor, unconscious and struggling to breathe. Evidence later showed she defecated and vomited, signs of a severe overdose. Photographs taken by the men, later recovered from a reformatted memory stick, depicted Diane naked and unconscious, with some images showing sexual acts involving her. Rather than seeking immediate help, the men delayed action. Wilhelm waited over an hour before contacting the ship's medical staff at 8:10 a.m., by which time Diane was unresponsive. The men then showered her body, dressed her in a t-shirt and shorts, and attempted to clean the cabin before help arrived. Medical staff attempted resuscitation but pronounced Diane dead shortly after. Initial reports to security suggested a heart attack, but the circumstances, her location in a stranger's cabin, the delay in seeking help, and the men's behaviour raised immediate suspicions. For Diane's family, the nightmare was just beginning. Alma, woken by the ship's staff, was summoned to the medical centre and informed of Diane's death, with little explanation beyond the initial heart attack claim. Talia, Alma and Carrie-Anne were forced to remain on the ship for 2 more days as it continued to Noumea, unable to disembark until detectives boarded in Noumea. The family returned to Australia devastated, with scant details provided by P&O or authorities in the immediate aftermath. Back in Brisbane, Diane's ex-husband Mark Brimble and partner David Mitchell were left grappling with shock and confusion. It wasn't until weeks later, after her body was transferred to Sydney for autopsy, that toxicology reports revealed the true cause of death, a lethal mix of alcohol and GHB, with levels 3 times higher than a recreational dose. This confirmed that Diane had overdosed, but how the drug entered her system, whether willingly or unknowingly, became the central question. New South Wales Police launched an investigation, complicated by jurisdictional issues because the ship was in international waters and P&O's initial mishandling of the scene. Crew had failed to secure cabin D-182, allowing the men to re-enter and remove belongings, potentially destroying evidence. Detectives boarded in Noumea, interviewing passengers and seizing items, including a camera memory stick handed in as lost property. Forensic experts recovered over 150 deleted images from the stick, showing Diane unconscious and the men's callous behaviour, including derogatory comments about her appearance and suggestions of throwing her overboard. The Adelaide 8 became persons of interest. Intercepted phone calls later revealed attempts to align their stories, with Kuchel coaching Silvestri on testimony and expressing frustration at media scrutiny. Wilhelm initially denied giving Diane drugs, but evidence suggested he supplied the GHB, possibly obtained from Silvestri. The investigation painted a picture of a predatory encounter, with Diane preyed upon in an impaired state, unable to consent. A coronial inquest, led by Deputy State Coroner Jacqueline Millage, began in March 2006 at Sydney's Glebe Coroner's Court. It aimed to determine the cause and circumstances of Diane's death and exposed shocking details over multiple sittings. Mark Brimble represented the family, questioning witnesses, while the men's conflicting accounts unravelled. Silvestri claimed Diane took GHB willingly, but family testimony and her character refuted this. Counsel assisting Ron Honig argued she was incapacitated, a view supported by the drug's effects and her rapid decline. Millage's findings, delivered on the 30th of November 2010, were unequivocal. Diane had been unknowingly drugged for the sexual gratification of others. She criticised Wilhelm for not informing medical staff about the GHB, denying Diane a chance of survival, and condemned the men's callous disregard. Millage also slammed New South Wales Police for withholding evidence, creating an impasse that hampered the inquest, and P&O for lax security. She recommended federal oversight of cruise ship deaths, tighter drug screening, and police presence on vessels, none of which were fully implemented. In September 2008, the New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions charged 3 men, Wilhelm with manslaughter and supplying a prohibited drug, and Silvestri and Kuchel with perverting the course of justice. Coming up, the lenient sentence handed down to the ringleader. The trial began in 2009, with prosecutor Mark Hobart alleging Wilhelm gave Diane GHB in a water bottle and delayed help, costing her life. However, the case faltered. In 2010, after a hung jury, Wilhelm pleaded guilty to supplying GHB in exchange for the manslaughter charge being dropped. Justice Roderick Howie sentenced him to no further penalty, citing 8 years of public humiliation and mental health struggles as sufficient punishment. Silvestri and Kuchel pleaded guilty to concealing an indictable offence, also avoiding jail. No one was convicted of causing Diane's death directly, leaving her family devastated. Mark Brimble called the outcome a waste of taxpayers' money, noting that key inquest recommendations remain unacted upon. Diane's death shattered her family. Mark Brimble fought tirelessly for justice, attending every inquest session and speaking publicly to preserve Diane's dignity. Talia, just 12 at the time, lost her mother in traumatic circumstances, while Alma and Carrie Ann endured the horror of the cruise. Outside court in 2010, Mark expressed relief at the inquest's closure, but frustration at the lack of accountability. The family chose to focus on healing, with Mark later telling media they wanted to move forward without the case defining them. The case sparked outrage over cruise ship safety and party culture. Media coverage, sometimes criticised as sensationalist, highlighted the vulnerability of passengers and the need for better regulation. P&O introduced some security changes like improved surveillance, but the family and advocates argued it wasn't enough. The Adelaide 8 became vilified, their reputations destroyed, though only 3 faced charges. Diane's story also raised awareness of GHB's dangers and the risk of predatory behaviour in party settings. As of March 2025, Mark Brimble's 2018 lament that nothing has changed still resonates with systemic reforms lagging. Wilhelm, Silvestri and Kuchel faded from public view after 2010, their lives marked by scrutiny. Dragan Losic, another of the 8, faced unrelated assault charges in 2024, receiving a suspended sentence. The remaining 4 were never charged, but remained linked to the case in public memory. Diane Brimble's death was a preventable tragedy that exposed failures in oversight, justice and compassion. From a joyous holiday embarkation to a grim cabin floor, her story is one of lost potential and enduring pain. The inquest confirmed she was a victim, not a willing participant, yet the legal system delivered incomplete justice. As of 2025, her legacy persists as a cautionary tale, urging vigilance and reform in an industry that failed her. For her family, it's a wound that time has softened but not fully healed, a reminder of a life cut short by others' recklessness. I want to read from the appeal judgment delivered by Justice Roderick Howie. You be the judge. On 21st April last, the offender, Mark Robin Wilhelm, pleaded guilty to an offence of supply a prohibited drug, that drug being gamma hydroxybutyrate, known as GHB. The circumstances in which Mr. Wilhelm came to commit that offence must be known to almost every member of the adult community of this state, and really, there is little for me to say about the nature of the offence. However, for the purposes of sentencing him, I should indicate that the facts are that the offender took on board the cruise an amount of the drug. How much of the drug he had and what he intended to do with it is not in the evidence. However, there is no suggestion at all that he intended to do anything with the drug by way of a commercial nature. Mrs. Brimble, a mature woman, although under the influence of alcohol, as was the offender, went to the offender's cabin in order to have consensual intercourse with him. While in the cabin, Mrs. Brimble observed the offender was doing something with a liquid and asked what he was doing. The offender told her that he was having some fantasy, which is a street name for the drug which is also called GHB. Mrs. Brimble asked what it was, and the offender said that it was like ecstasy, but it made you 10 times hornier. The offender consumed a dose of the drug by pouring some of it into the lid of a water bottle and drinking it, and then poured a similar dose for Mrs. Brimble, which she consumed. It is a matter of history now that as a result of the ingestion of that drug and her previous ingestion of alcohol, that Mrs. Brimble died as a result, in effect, of failure to breathe as a consequence of the effect of the drug on her central nervous system. It must be obvious that I am sentencing the offender only for supply of a drug to Mrs. Brimble. I cannot sentence him for any other offence that he may have committed in relation to either Mrs. Brimble or in relation to the drug. In particular, I am not sentencing the offender for the consequences of his supply of the drug to Mrs. Brimble. That material must be put to one side, and concentration must be on the nature of the supply of the drug for which he has pleaded guilty and for which he must be sentenced. The offence of supply, when charged on indictment as this charge is, would normally carry a maximum penalty of 15 years imprisonment. However, a supply of this nature would never be dealt with on indictment except in the very exceptional circumstances of this particular case. That is because a supply of this nature would never be so serious as to warrant prosecution in the district court or Supreme Court, and would never warrant any consideration of the maximum penalty for the offence when prosecuted on indictment. In fact, it is almost unknown for a charge of supply of drugs to be prosecuted in this court. The reason why the offender is before this court and not before a magistrate is because he was charged after a coronial inquiry with an ex officio indictment alleging both that he unlawfully killed Mrs. Brimble and that he supplied her with the drug GHB. The history of the matter is that the offender has always pleaded not guilty to both the supply of the drug and bringing about the death of Mrs. Brimble. It is also history that he recently attempted to plead guilty to an offence in relation to the effect of the drug on Mrs. Brimble. That plea was allowed to be withdrawn because, in my view, he had not committed the offence to which he pleaded guilty. As I have made perfectly clear, Mrs. Brimble was voluntarily consuming the drug, even though she did so under the influence of alcohol, and therefore in no way was the offender responsible for the effect of the drug upon Mrs. Brimble. No more needs to be said about it. If this matter were dealt with, as it normally would, before the magistrate, the maximum penalty is 1 of 2 years' imprisonment. Depending on whether the quantity of the drug is a small quantity or where it is over a small quantity, that affects the fine that might be imposed upon the offender. This is an unusual supply offence to have been prosecuted. The reason for that is because almost invariably an offence of supply that results in a charge before a court is a supply for profit. The police would have observed the offence take place, or the supply was to an undercover police officer or something of that nature. It is, in my experience, rare to have what I might call a social supply offence before the court. The reason for that is because both the person supplying the drug and the person receiving and administering the drug are committing offences. It was an offence for Mrs. Brimble to consume the drug, just as it was an offence for the offender to supply it to her. In those circumstances, it seems unlikely that persons involved in that activity are going to bring the matter before the authorities. Therefore, on the scale of offences of supply, it must be on the very lowest rung. I cannot think of a supply offence which would be less serious than that committed by the offender in relation to Mrs. Brimble. The offender has a very limited criminal record. He was fined for an offence in 2001 that can be disregarded as being irrelevant. It had nothing to do with the use of drugs. Of more concern is that in 2005 he was charged with what was in effect cultivation of cannabis, but that offence has to be seen in the somewhat unusual legislation that I understand exists in South Australia in relation to the use of cannabis. That state takes a different approach to that drug than other states do. The only matter of concern is that the offender was involved in another drug offence whilst under the cloud, if I may say so, of this matter. However, that penalty, because he was not convicted, does not seem to me to be of any great significance in determining what I should do with him in respect of this supply. A large amount of material has been placed before me, really to indicate that substantially the offender is a person of good behaviour and of good reputation, apart from the reputation that has been destroyed by the allegations made against him and the reporting of those allegations in the media. This is not meant to criticise the media. It is not for me to sit in judgment of the media or their behaviour in respect of this matter. But as I have already indicated in this court, there was a degree of hysteria which surrounded the allegations in respect of the death of Mrs. Brimble, which was brought about by rumours and mistakes or misunderstandings in relation to the events of the particular night, and they do not need to be revisited for the purposes of sentencing the offender. The relevance, however, is the effect this has had upon the offender. There are before me a number of psychiatric reports which indicate that the offender has, over a long period of time, suffered from severe mental illness as a result of the allegations against him, the publicity of them, and the ramifications of what he has done. Again, because I am sentencing him for the offence of supply, it is unnecessary to go into those matters in any detail. However, nobody should have any doubt that Mr. Wilhelm has suffered grievously as a result of what occurred on that particular night. He has, through a period of years, been subject to acute mental illness as a result of depression and anxiety, not simply for himself and the predicament he found himself in, but because of the reaction it has had on him, his family, and the Brimble family as a result, as I have said, what would have been seen by him as an insignificant incident that occurred on this cruise boat. Further on, Justice Howie says, the consequences for Mr. Wilhelm and what he has been through over the years must indicate to people of a like mind in the community that they may bear the overall consequences for their actions in relation to the use and supply of what are sometimes referred to as party drugs. GHB is a dangerous drug, as are others such as ecstasy and those drugs that have been prescribed under the Act. Why they are prescribed is because they are dangerous, as Mr. Wilhelm will now understand until his dying day. There is, in my view, no need to impose any further punishment on Mr. Wilhelm. No punishment that I could give would be anything like the punishment that he has suffered over the years as a result of the activity of this night. The Crown does not suggest that I should do anything more than place him on a good behaviour bond. That is, of course, clearly common sense. Again, if one strips away all of the consequences of this activity, it seems to be an indicator of the very lowest criminality of the offence of supply that could be imagined. I have been asked by Defence Counsel to dismiss that charge under Section 10. I do not intend to do that, mainly because I think that might send a different message to members of the community. It seems to me that taking into account everything now that has happened to Mr. Wilhelm, the proper way to deal with the matter is to deal with it under Section 10A of the Crimes Sentencing Procedure Act. That seems to me to be a section that has recently been added to the armoury of the sentencing court in such a case where the court indicates that the charge was deserving of a conviction, but one where it is deserving of no other punishment in the circumstances of the particular case. I just want to make it clear, as I hope I have done, the limited criminality for which Mr. Wilhelm is being sentenced and the severity of the extracurricular punishment that he has suffered as a result of what occurred on this particular night, and the remorse that he has shown constantly from the very day after the death of Mrs. Brimble for the consequences of his conduct, which he could in no way have foreseen, even if he had been sober. In those circumstances, the offender is convicted under Section 10A of the Crimes Sentencing Procedure Act. I impose no further penalty. Mr. Wilhelm, finally, it has come to an end, and you can get on, hopefully, with the rest of your life as best as you are able. Thanks for listening to Crime Insiders Judgements. We love hearing your feedback, so please rate and review this episode. If you have a case you want us to cover, let us know via Instagram at LiSTNR Crime or TikTok at LiSTNR Crime Team. I'll be back again next Thursday with another case. I'm Dan Mullins. Thanks for listening. This series was recorded and produced on Gadigal land.